Should government policies focus on the common good? When breaking this question down, you really have to look at it from two perspectives. One, you have the common good on one end and you have individual rights on the other. And so first, the common good. This is something that is shared by a large group of people and it's beneficial to most or all members of that group. Then you also have individual rights. And so just as the term states, it focuses on a single person rather than an entire group. Now, this doesn't mean that a lot of individuals can exercise this or benefit from it. The intention is not to apply this to a large group of people because they belong to a certain group. It's more people exercising certain rights and taking chances and advocating for themselves as opposed to others doing it for them. And so one of the relationships between these two is that individual rights tend to be sacrificed for the common good. And so you think of certain regulations, certain laws, or whatever. Do they do government policies affect groups equally? And that's always the you know the way people look at certain policies. Well, that seems to just benefit those people, but not me. Because I do this or I do that or I belong to this group. Why am I excluded? And so that's one of the questions you need to address. Also, how do certain policies that only apply to certain groups provide a greater benefit to a much larger percent of the population? So that means if something was meant to benefit, say, uh, African Americans or a religious group or a low income group or whatever the group is, because the policy is directly aimed to help them, are other people benefiting because they benefit? And that's one of the questions that you should also address here. Now, US documents, there's information that supports both of these individual rights and common good. In the preamble to the Constitution, it states that the government's duty is to uphold the common good or promote the general welfare. And in the Declaration of Independence and the US Bill of Rights, there is language in there again about the importance of individual rights. So which is it? Is the common good more important or individual rights more important? Now, unfortunately, you're not allowed to say, well, you got to have a balance. No, you have to actually take a side. This one is more important. So that's actually the challenge here. You have to look at the evidence and look at how different policies affect people and support your argument. Now, there have been examples in history of one group being put before another group. And so when we looked at the Tariff of Abominations or the Tariff of 1828, we know that certain people in the country, mainly people in the South, weren't very happy about it, and they even threatened secession at the time because they were so against this policy. They thought it favored one group at the expense of another. And then in 1896, this became a public policy for a very long time, the separate but equal clause, where people were allowed to be segregated as long as standards were maintained equally for whites and for blacks. And history has shown us that they were not equal. All right, but the idea was, oh, we'll separate them. We'll forget about their rights because we'll focus on what's good for other people, right? Because they didn't want to be around certain people or whatever the case was. All right, so this is an example. And then in more recent history, there's a religious group that would make it a habit of picketing or protesting funerals, usually military funerals, and they were against the military for many reasons. And this went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court ruled 8-1 in favor of the protesters, saying that although it was maybe shameful and upsetting to the people attending the funeral, they were protesting a public issue, not necessarily that funeral. It's a fine line. And again, the people at the funeral obviously were upset about it, but the Supreme Court thought this was uh, an issue of upholding individual rights as opposed to, well, let's protect the feelings of the people attending the funeral.